The invitation seemed innocent enough at first. A family gathering, a celebration to mark the holidays, nothing out of the ordinary. My in-laws had always loved throwing big events, and I figured this one would be no different. What I didn't expect was that I would end up cooking a feast for 50 people all by myself, while they just sat there, smiling like everything was perfectly normal. It started the day before the gathering. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law. "We're having a big family party tomorrow. Can you handle the cooking?" I blinked, rereading the text. "Handle the cooking? For how many?" "50 guests," she replied casually, as if I wasn't just processing the scale of the request. 50 people. My mind raced. The kitchen in our small apartment wasn't designed for that kind of demand, and I barely had enough experience with large-scale cooking to feel confident. But family was family, and I didn't want to disappoint. I agreed. As the sun rose on the day of the party, I already felt the weight of the task pressing down on me. I walked into the kitchen, the air thick with anticipation and the faint scent of old spices lingering from previous meals. The counters were soon covered with mountains of ingredients. Stacks of fresh vegetables, dozens of pounds of meat, piles of rice and pasta, spices, sauces, and more. I had a mental checklist, but it quickly became clear that this was not going to be a simple dinner. The first hours were a whirlwind, chopping endless piles of onions, garlic, and peppers until my fingers ached, stirring massive pots that felt heavier than I could lift, sweat dripping down my temples. The sound of sizzling meat, the sharp smell of burning oil, and the relentless ticking of the clock created a chaotic symphony in the tiny kitchen. My back ached, my legs trembled, but I kept moving. There was no one to ask for help, no one to share the burden. Meanwhile, the in-laws lounged in the living room, voices calm, glasses raised, smiles plastered on their faces as if watching a well-rehearsed play. Every now and then, my mother-in-law would poke her head into the kitchen with a saccharine remark. "You're doing so well," she said once, a smile stretched too wide. "We're all looking forward to the food." The irony of that statement sank deep into my chest like a cold blade. They weren't helping. They were spectators. My muscles screamed, but I couldn't show it. The hours crawled by. I moved from stove to oven, from chopping board to sink, washing dishes between frantic cooking sessions. The clatter of pots and pans was the only sound from my side of the house. Outside, the laughter and chatter of the guests began to rise, a reminder of the world that awaited the fruits of my labor. Halfway through, fatigue hit me hard. My hands shook as I tried to roll out dough for the homemade bread. My vision blurred briefly as a wave of dizziness washed over me. But I forced myself to push through. I thought of the smiling faces I wanted to see around the table, the family unity I wanted to foster. Wasn't this what family was about? But then I caught a glimpse of my husband, sitting back in his chair with a relaxed expression, chatting comfortably with his parents. Not a single dish in his hands, not a single gesture of help. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them see the work I was doing. But I swallowed the frustration and returned to the stove, stirring the sauce with trembling hands. By the time the first guests began to arrive, the kitchen looked like a war zone. Flour dusted every surface, sauce stains speckled the floor, and the air was thick with heat and exhaustion. I barely had time to catch my breath before the demands escalated. "Is the rice ready yet? When will the chicken be done? Can we get some appetizers out?" The questions poured in, each one a reminder of how little time I had to finish. And through it all, my in-laws continued their silent vigil, smiling and nodding, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. That first part of the day was a blur of movement and noise, sweat and silence, effort and indifference. I felt invisible, a background character in my own story. But I knew the night was far from over. The real test was yet to come. As the front door swung open and guests began streaming in, the atmosphere shifted instantly. From tense and chaotic behind the kitchen door, to light and festive in the living room. I wiped my hands on my apron and forced a smile as I peeked out. The house was already buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and lively chatter. 50 people had gathered, and the mood was warm and welcoming. except I was painfully aware that I hadn't yet served a single dish. My husband approached, offering a quick, casual hug. "Everything's going great, right?" he asked, the ease in his voice stinging sharply. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I tell him that I was running on fumes, that my legs trembled, that my fingers felt numb, that my spirit was breaking under the weight of this impossible task? I turned back to the kitchen where the real battle raged. The buffet table was still empty, the serving dishes waiting to be filled with food that was barely finished cooking. The oven beeped relentlessly, reminding me that the roast chicken needed attention. Pans boiled over, smoke began creeping from the corner of the stove, and I juggled one thing after another with desperate speed. Through the crack in the kitchen door, I caught sight of my mother-in-law, seated comfortably on the sofa, chatting animatedly with her friends. Every now and then, she glanced in my direction with an innocent smile, as if everything was perfectly fine. But her eyes held no hint of urgency, no offer of help. Time became elastic. Minutes stretched painfully long, and every second felt like a mountain to climb. I was trapped in a loop of preparation and panic, with no breaks, no respite. My legs screamed from standing for hours. My throat was parched, but the idea of stepping away for even a moment was unthinkable. At one point, I accidentally dropped a heavy pot, the clang echoing through the room. The sound was met with a brief glance from my father-in-law, who simply shook his head disapprovingly before turning back to his conversation. No one rushed to help or check if I was okay. By the time I finally got the first dishes onto the buffet table, guests had already started helping themselves. The relief was fleeting. There was still so much left to do. The main courses, the desserts, the drinks, everything demanded attention. I felt like a one-woman army battling a storm with nothing but a spoon. I stole a quick moment to lean against the counter, closing my eyes. The exhaustion was overwhelming. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away fiercely. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Suddenly, my husband's voice cut through the noise. "Hey, why don't you come sit for a bit? You deserve a break." I turned, hope flickering, but it vanished when I saw the smirk tugging at his lips. "Seriously, relax a little. We've got this covered." His eyes never left the living room crowd, where everyone else was still comfortably seated. I swallowed hard. "I don't see anyone else cooking," I said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. His smirk faltered for a moment but quickly returned. "Well, you're the cook. It's what you signed up for." Those words hit me like a slap. I wanted to scream, to tell him how unfair this was, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and went back to the stove. Because giving up wasn't an option. The night stretched on, and I moved like a ghost through the kitchen, barely aware of time passing. Every dish demanded my attention. The roast had to be basted again, the salads needed tossing, desserts carefully plated. Each task felt heavier than the last, but the party outside continued without pause, as if I was invisible. At one point, I glanced out through the half-open kitchen door. The guests were laughing, clinking glasses, enjoying themselves without a care in the world. My in-laws were the loudest among them, raising their glasses with exaggerated cheers. The sight twisted something inside me. Anger, frustration, and a deep, aching loneliness. I wiped my sweaty brow and bent over the stove, stirring a pot of sauce that was threatening to burn. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. A guest had arrived late. I wanted to rush out and greet them, but I was frozen. There was no time, no energy. The thought that I couldn't even enjoy the celebration I'd prepared for stung more than I expected. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my husband. "Take a break. You've done enough." I stared at the screen, then put the phone down, unanswered. "Enough," I whispered bitterly. "You think this is enough?" A wave of heat flushed through me as my emotions threatened to spill over. I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I had taken on this impossible task. Family, love, duty. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice whispered that this wasn't love. It was exploitation. Just then, a sharp crash echoed from the living room. I jumped, my heart pounding. I rushed out to see what had happened. There, by the table, one of the in-laws had accidentally knocked over a vase. The water spilled, drenching the carpet, but instead of helping clean it up, they laughed it off and waved it away like a minor inconvenience. "Don't worry about it," they said with a grin. I bit back the urge to say something. Instead, I nodded and returned to the kitchen, the weight of exhaustion settling over me like a suffocating blanket. I caught my reflection in the window, a woman with smeared makeup, hair sticking to her sweaty face, eyes hollow but determined. I barely recognized myself. As I prepared to plate the final dishes, a sudden thought hit me. What if no one thanked me? What if, after all this, no one even noticed the sacrifice I'd made? The idea was terrifying. The door creaked open again, and my husband stepped inside, carrying a plate piled high with food. "Here," he said, smiling. "Take a seat. Let me serve you for once." For a moment, I hesitated, but then I realized something. This wasn't just about the food. It was about respect, about recognition, about being seen. I looked him in the eyes and said quietly, "No, tonight, I'm the cook. But tomorrow things have to change." The party began to wind down, the guests slowly saying their goodbyes, laughter fading into tired murmurs. I finally allowed myself to sit down, the chair creaking beneath the weight of my exhaustion. My hands were still trembling, but the food was served, the guests fed, and the chaos was settling into quiet. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the silence wash over me. The adrenaline was fading, leaving raw ache in its place. My in-laws gathered their things, still smiling as if nothing had happened. My husband approached, hesitating this time. "I'm sorry," he said softly, voice low. "I didn't realize," he trailed off, searching my eyes. I took a shaky breath. "It's not just about tonight," I said. "It's about how I felt this entire time, like I was invisible, like my effort didn't matter." He nodded slowly, the weight of his own guilt sinking in. "You're right. I should have helped. I was wrong to let you do it alone." We sat there quietly for a moment. The tension that had been building all evening seemed to soften, but I knew the real work was just beginning. "I don't want to be the one who's expected to do everything," I said firmly. "Not just cooking, but everything. Family means sharing the load." My husband reached out, taking my hand. "I promise I'll do better." As the last guests left and the house fell silent, I felt a flicker of hope. This night had been the hardest I'd ever faced, but it had also been a wake-up call. I wouldn't let myself be invisible anymore. Not to my family, not to anyone. The kitchen was a mess, but it was mine, and so was my voice. The morning after the party, I stood in the quiet kitchen, surveying the aftermath. Crumpled napkins, half-empty bottles, and empty dishes littered the counters. The chaos was a physical reminder of the night before. The sweat, the tears, the invisible labor that had gone unnoticed for far too long. But something had shifted. I wasn't just the person who cooked for 50 people alone. I was someone who finally found the courage to speak up. Over the following days, conversations changed. My husband started helping, not just in the kitchen, but with everything. My in-laws, once so distant, began to ask how they could contribute. The tension eased, replaced by a new respect. Looking back, that overwhelming night was a turning point. It taught me that love isn't just about showing up. It's about sharing the load, valuing each other's efforts, and standing together. To anyone watching who's ever felt invisible or taken for granted, know this: your effort matters. Your voice matters. Don't be afraid to demand the respect you deserve, because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most meaningful victories.